Hello, everyone. Welcome to this in the latest of the Day One Executive interview series. It is my great pleasure and joy to introduce to you Christel Crawford, an absolute creator of magnitude. There's no job title in the world that can begin to really encompass this magnificent being, as I'm certain you'll all agree as we dive into this conversation. I call Christel a change maven. I can think of no better way to really get at what she's really up to in the world. But the beautiful thing about Christel that I really wanted to share with all of you is that Christel isn't just creating transformative change really in every moment in her own life. Christel is committed to helping other people do this in their lives and businesses as well. I'm putting these finishing touches on the Day One Executive. Christel really embodies that germinal energy, really even of the book. And this title of this interview, which is, all credit to Christel on this, is Do It Wrong, Do It Badly, Do It Anyway. And that willingness to take those risks, that willingness to be bad in order to discover your greatness, what you're really great at, is central. It's a central through line in the entire book. And Christel embodies this. So Christel, let me turn it over to you for just a quick hello and introduction, and then we're going to dive right into this rollicking ride of a conversation.
Oh my goodness, what an introduction, and thank you so much. I'm excited. I wonder where we'll go.
Yeah. So let's just dive in right now. Let me ask you, Christel. I mean, what was the inspiration and sort of the origin story behind? It was one of your social media posts, and I want to also just let our listeners here know that Christel is someone that I met like 8 or so years ago at a class in Vancouver. She stood out to me then, as I've said to her. I mean, really just, this brilliant being walking through this class. And I've watched Christel grow a business, probably many businesses, but the one I've currently got my eye on that she's currently active in, I've watched her grow that out of nothing, create something out of nothing. Christel now has tens of thousands of followers on all of her various social media channels. And I encourage you to find her, and we'll make sure that you know how to find her before the end of this call. But one of the keys to this, and one of the posts on her, social media that caught my eye, it was what I really consider to be a secret it's a secret key to being able to custom create your career. And it's Christel's willingness and her exhortation and invitation to everyone in her universe to be willing to do it wrong, do it badly, and do it anyway. And so, Christel, what's the origin story on that? What's the inspiration for even that quip, which I just think is brilliant?
It was an accident. I was facilitating. I think I had at the time, I had just started facilitating entrepreneurs, and it was this club thing that I'd called School of Business. And I don't know if I was doing a Facebook Live or a Zoom call, but I was facilitating somebody or some question. And I was like, just do it wrong, do it badly, do it anyway. And so it just emerged. And it's turned into being sort of the catchphrase or the motto for everything that I am in the world and everything that I'm constantly encouraging people to choose. Because it's true, unless you're willing to do it wrong or do it badly and just do it anyway, nothing ever changes. You can't actually move forward in your career or in your life if you are constantly stuck with needing to do it right. So if you give yourself total permission to do it bad, then all of a sudden you're free. And it turns out what you create is so much more brilliant than you ever thought anyway. And you're always going to think it's bad. So it really doesn't matter, because even if it's brilliant, which is what other people are going to think, and you think it's bad, at least you did it anyway, and it's out there. So it's just become the elegant distillation of what it does really take to move anything forward.
Can you share a story? There's such a lightness in that. My universe is again blowing up here. Can you share a story, Christel, of how you saw that play out in your own life? A place where, you felt your own self-judgment was, I think I'm going to do this wrong or bad, and you did it anyway.
Yeah, I have a lot of stories. But the first one that comes to mind is when I really did start actively building the business that you see now. And I had gotten myself into a pickle. I had moved across the country. I was living in Canada, and I had $500 of credit to my name and no job. And I literally spent about 3 weeks just freaking out. My life needed to be totally different, and I had no idea how to get where I wanted to go. However, I had no money. So I had put myself into this pressure cooker of, I'm either going to die or I'm going to choose. And I've put myself in that position way too many times to even, like, I'm not necessarily proud of that, but apparently I need a lot of pressure to make a difference. And I whipped together what I called a worldwide challenge of this school. And I invited everybody for free, and I got like 400 people playing. And then by the end of the 3 days, I had no idea how I was going to monetize it. And somebody suggested, what if we pay you to go further? And I'm like, okay. And I put together this terrible landing page with like way too many choices. But I ended up generating my first $900 online. And I was like, how'd that happen?
Wait, what?
The whole thing felt like an accident, like it shouldn't be happening. Like I didn't know what I was doing. I didn't know what I was doing. And it occurred, but it only occurred when I was finally willing to just sit there with myself and go, you gonna do this wrong or you gonna die, And so I just jumped in and started. And so hopefully not everybody out there who's listening to this needs to create that much pressure for themselves. I don't recommend it, but it can occur that way.
And one of the things that just strikes me, Christel, is, when I think about some of the folks that I interact with and see in corporate spaces and stuff, is that this idea of like you said, the pressure that we can put on ourselves, or that we sort of wait to build up in our worlds before we give ourselves permission to choose. I encounter a lot of people who might come for executive coaching who are, or career change coaching, but they're coming at a time when they've become deeply unhappy in that job. And with that can come that feeling of being stuck. And sort of your own self-concept can really start to sort of swirl and go down the tube, which makes it that much harder, or can feel like it's making it that much harder to create that next move. So this idea that what if we didn't have to wait for that pressure to sort of build, it's almost as though that's what gives us permission to feel like we can just choose anything. And I don't mean to suggest that there's not a place for expertise. I 100% believe there is. For heaven's sakes, if you're needing brain surgery, you definitely don't want someone willing to do it wrong, do it badly, and do it anyway. I mean, you want the expert when it comes to that, right? So I want to be very clear. And, certainly I do a lot of work in my own niche that requires expertise. But I will say that reflecting on this interview, Christel, it struck me that so a lot of the work I do with corporate and government organizations is around consensus building, because large scale, complex, transformational change at scale in organizations, in societies, institutionally, requires a whole lot of people committing to moving in a certain direction, however messy that may be, and be willing to change course when needed, right? We're also going to stay open to that, but it requires a whole lot of people doing that for that to happen. And that's really my sort of space of a lot of my corporate business with AHA Insight. But I was reflecting on this interview and I thought, it's interesting in my own career. And I'm someone that had to have that pressure build up, apparently, because I was a fast burner early in my career, running a profit and loss center before I was 30, and very unhappy. And I became so unhappy in my corporate role that I was literally diagnosed with 2 autoimmune disorders. I mean, it was really taking a physical toll on my body at that time. I ended up taking an extended, not as extended as I would now wish I had taken, but like a 2-month sabbatical. Wish I'd made that like a 2-year sabbatical. But during that sabbatical, I saw a career coach. And I also did something that I wouldn't have given myself permission to do previously. And that was that while I was this manager in this business unit of a company, I had hired some facilitators, some consensus building type facilitators, to work in a worldwide conference I was running at the time that I really wanted to flip the model. I wanted to make it interactive. I wanted to find out what all the people at the conference know, not just the one person at the podium. So we brought these facilitators in. And when I saw them doing what they were doing, I instantly knew, I don't know anything about that, but I want to be that. I want to do that. I want to do what you're doing. I'll have what you're having. And what I'm realizing is they're Mike Smith and David Keever. I will be forever grateful to them. They were the space. They created the space. They gave me the space. And they were that space of possibility for me, where they created a space. They began to invite me into doing that facilitation work with them. And then before I knew it, they were putting me in front. They were having me run these meetings. And Christel, when I look back at that, I'm like, my gosh, that was so reckless. I mean, I knew absolutely nothing. I had no credentials in that area at the time, but they were willing to let me do it wrong, let me do it badly, let me do it anyway. And thank goodness, I guess I didn't know enough to know even how to judge myself at the time, or I was so desperate to make a change that I allowed myself to do that. And Christel, the irony is that the very thing I would have been so afraid of ever trying, if I had thought I had to be good at it first, turned out to be, and my willingness to do it wrong, do it badly, do it anyway, is what allowed me to even discover, not only do I really love that work, but it turns out I had some real capacities in that. I ended up building a career in that, and I now have a business largely devoted to that. And it was only because, I mean, I didn't grow up thinking I would do that. I didn't even know you could do that until I saw them doing that. But their willingness to create that space for me is really, what allowed me to even get that key to something that would become part of my own greatness was, and I don't mean that in a tooting own horn way. I mean that in something I believe that we should all be doing, which is being willing to acknowledge our own greatness, because that's so much of where career satisfaction and success can come from. Yeah. But I guess my long-winded point on this is that the discovery of that was hiding behind a door. And that door is called being willing to fall flat on your face and humiliate yourself. And if you're not willing to walk through that door, then you don't ever get to discover the greatness behind that door.
Yeah. A choice is what creates awareness. Without the choice, you can never have the awareness. And it's interesting because you said a lot of amazing things. A lot of what you were kind of saying was like, well, I didn't even know I could be good at this. But what's interesting about that is somewhere in us, we do know. And that to me is the thing that has always led me forward, but I wouldn't say it's conscious. I wouldn't say I'm like, frontal lobe going, well, I'm great, so I'm going to choose this. It's not like that. But somewhere in us, we just know that something is there. So I think that's also interesting, is like, there is, if any of you watching are having a pull towards something, you do know. And those pulls and those pings and those pressure moments are your own personal breadcrumb trail to something you would never have been able to cognitively design from a logical point of view.
Can we pull that thread just a little more for people who might be feeling like they're surveying their universe right now and they're not yet seeing maybe what really could be their greatness? I mean, can you talk a little bit more like what does it feel like? What does it look like? What does it sense like to know? Is there a way we can put words to that?
I mean, knowing doesn't have any doubt in it. And for me, it's this very kind of centered sensation right in the middle of my being, like right in my body, even like it kind of sits down here. It's like when you just know, and that energy sort of like permeates down into the ground. But we are so entrained to live in our heads. And me too. And so, I mean, I remember so many conversations in different workshops where I was being, they poke fun at me. I was a brain on legs, basically like I was up here in my head constantly. And so I had to really train myself in a different way. I had to really look at, if I did know, what would I choose? I had to sort of practice knowing, because I wasn't trained to know. I was trained to judge and trained to think and trained to feel and trained to discern and decide and all of these things that were actively present in my world, but they weren't assisting me in creating a life where I got to have what I knew must be possible. So I had to practice different things. I had to, and for me, access consciousness was the opening to beginning to have language and articulation for these things. So you guys will all find your way with that. But that was what I had to start to practice. And, I mean, even to this finer points of like even getting that when something's really true for me, it expands my world. And when it's not true for me, it does this thing and I'm, pressed in on myself and heavy and contracted. So it was this learning process of learning how to guide myself forward into a future I had no reference points for. And the only way you can guide yourself forward into a future like that is with what you know and with what you're sensing. And all these things kind of come in to hack that to pieces. Doubt and fear are there to distract us from what it is we can truly choose that we don't even know we can choose, but somewhere in us we know we can choose it. And so, yeah, so it was a practice, and I'm constantly, even today, practicing it and using different tools to get more access to that. Because if you think anybody else can tell me where I'm going, nobody, I can't even tell me where I'm going.
I just love that idea of no reference points for the future, because when you think about that, it's like wherever you are in your career right now, those of you watching or listening in the future, it's like when you look at where you are in your career right now, I would ask you, when you were 7 years old, when you were 12, when you were 18, 22, could you have predicted exactly where you would be? And I would say that with the, maybe there's a few exceptions, maybe perhaps, medical students know they want to become a doctor, right? And I've always envied these types. But I think that for many of us, and I'll speak for myself, certainly, absolutely not. When I look back, and so while I might feel like I'm sort of struggling right now to grasp, wow, what does Christel mean when she talks about no reference points in the future? I'm realizing that as I look back, and if I was to roll the hands of time back, I would realize I've never had any reference points for the future. It's always been this wide open creative canvas, and how liberating would it be for all of us to let go of feeling like we have to follow some predefined linear path to what a quote career path looks like. I would love to hear you just talk a little even about your own story of recreation and reinvention, Christel. I think that's another really inspiring thing about you. You're like, if anybody's seen the movie Fletch, this was one of my favorite Chevy Chase movies. But he's like a journalist, like this undercover journalist, and he ends up having like 7 different identities, and my friends have always called me Fletch because I've had like 7 different careers. But Christel, you've had like 27. So I would love to hear you, just walk us through a little bit of like what the reinvention of Christel even looked like, because I think that will help people get the energy of what it means to not have reference points about one's future.
Yeah. Well, I don't know. I kind of started out funny. Like, when you come out of high school, the typical path is you go to university. Well, that's where my first divergence was. I got my GED. I didn't even graduate. I was getting straight A's up until my
that's liberating kind of to hear. Wow.
Yeah, I got straight A's up until my sophomore year, and then junior and senior year, my family was going through court and all kinds of trauma, and so I just started flunking. And so I got my GED. That was my first divergence. And then I looked at college and nothing was interesting to me. So I took 2 classes that I still use today. I took university Spanish and typing, which I can still use for my online business. I was looking for a foundation for my life. At the time, I was working in an office as a receptionist for an architect, making ends meet, doing the normal thing. And I was just getting so bored. And I remember looking at my computer going, this is it? Like, this is life? I had a boy. I did the thing. I had a boyfriend, I had an apartment, and I had a nice job with a 401k.
And I think so many people listening can relate to this, Christel. Whatever the job is, right? Swap out whatever the job is. I think there's so many people who can relate to this and yet feel a little bit like, is this it?
That is literally where I got to. I remember actually sitting there I had a beautiful window, sun was coming in, and I was like, wow, this is really boring. And there was everything to be grateful for. So like I always did, I started looking and anyway, stumbled onto this little school. So I ended up taking myself all the way across the country, a 20-hour road trip to Alabama from Colorado, and going to a small Bible school where the pastor was really committed to giving us a foundation for our life and teaching us how to run an organization. So I worked 3 jobs and I went to school for 3 years, just nonstop. I just trained and trained and trained and trained. I learned how to preach and pastor and run teams and lead and, all the stuff in the Bible as well. Like, and I really, really, really changed me. And then the Lex Logic, so I tried Logic again right after that. So that was kind of this huge divergence, and I was transformed. And then I was like, well, what do you do now? I'm 27 and like, guess it's time to get married. So I looked around the spectrum of people available, and there was only 2 I was remotely interested in. And of course, that was all that was possible.
Oh.
And I looked at the one and I'm like, you'll do. So married for about 5 years and then ended up getting divorced, and then I got remarried right away again. And that's a 10-year span of my life that has a lot more to tell about it. But
go follow Christel on any of her properties to hear more about that.
In that 10-year span,
awareness part of her life.
Yes, I owned a restaurant for 3 years. We were featured on the Food Network. We were renovated and featured on the Food Network. We went bankrupt. I recertified as a landscape designer, and I started a landscape design business. We got a loan and we started a small landscaping company. And then at 36 years old, at the tail end of my second marriage, I found myself on the front lawn of our farmhouse, sobbing myself into the ground, ready to go upstairs and blackout drink and drown because I was so sad inside. I was just sad. I could not figure out how to be happy. And my poor husband at the time was just trying everything that he knew how and didn't understand why I wasn't happy with normal, because we were doing normal and I wasn't. I couldn't, so I was just going to die. Again, a bit of a long story, but I ended up having this friend recommend this lady, and I ended up seeing her for about 1.5 years or 3 times a week to get my feet under me. And about 6 months after that, when I'd separated from my husband, I found Access Consciousness. And at that time, this was my 90-second transformation. I was like, I wanted to start working with people. I wanted to start doing something that actually rewarded me deeply, instead of just being everybody else's good idea. And so I had gotten accepted to a nutrition school, because that was my first idea. I just started where I started. I'm like, I guess I'll get certified in nutrition and I'll go do this thing. Got accepted, had paid to have my car shipped, and I took my first Access Consciousness class. And I was like, could not look away. Like, wait a minute. You can change things in people's lives in 5 seconds from the energy?
Wow.
What the ever-loving, yes, like sign me up. And I think I became a facilitator faster than almost anybody. It was 8 months and I just like ran to becoming a certified facilitator. So I say that because, I had always known from when I was a teenager that I'd always had this sense that I was meant for something great. I mean, and then you just start bashing around in what that means. I took myself on a missions trip to China for 3 months and, started smuggling Bibles across the border, because at that time it was illegal to be a Christian. I'm like, that's inspiring. Try that. And then I, did this and tried that and went here and went there. And when I found Access Consciousness about 1 year in, I'm like, yes, like clear road ahead. And then I spent 1.5 years struggling. So, I mean, it's not even that you find the answer. It's that you know something. And you just are, you just keep leading yourself forward in the best way you can.
To me, certainly, you're born to empower. I mean, and I think part of what makes, part of the magic of your greatness is that you really have been and done and seen
everything.
And you really are able to now be like a candle holder to other people coming behind you. And I'm so profoundly grateful for your willingness to keep going. Because I think that's the other thing that I even have in my notes here, is that this hasn't been just this like nothing but success story. Everyone jokes about it's never an overnight success story. It's a 20-year, 30-year success story. Well, yes, and it can have a whole lot of twists and turns. One of the things I just really so appreciate about you, Christel, is that most of us are able to, we have to sort of fight ourselves on this in terms of our willingness to do it bad, do it wrong, do it anyway. And maybe the few people who might see us, but you're someone who has invited the world to have a front row seat to that. in your own world. And that just takes chutzpah off the charts. And it's such a gift, because I think it allows us to watch you and to say, oh, well, she's still alive. She hasn't turned into a little fritter that just, self-incinerated. And so I begin to believe that, maybe I can do that. Maybe I can survive that myself even. I've always used like the president of the United States as an example, regardless whoever the president was, because that's one position that you can say for sure, that person, whoever it is, I don't care who they are, they've never been the president of the United States before.
Yeah, good point.
Whoever they are, right? And hey, some of them we might agree are doing it wrong, doing it badly, and doing it anyway. But, but in fairness, what can we take from that to empower our own lives, right? So the part of ourselves that would rule ourselves out, say maybe there's a job opportunity you want to go for. Maybe there's a position that doesn't even yet exist. I've never applied for a job that I've held in 30 years. I've been fortunate to kind of custom create each role. And I realized part of that is probably thinking like an entrepreneur. One of the books that in the Access Consciousness body of work by someone named Simone Milasas is called The Joy of Business. And it talks about, I think Christel might even be a Joy of Business facilitator. And are you, Christel?
I'm not, but everyone thinks I am.
How aware am I? This might be in your future.
But I do facilitate a lot of business because it's just my favorite thing.
You are the joy of business.
Yeah.
But one of the things it talks about is your life is your business is your life. And I was fortunate when I did start my career to land in a temp job at a company that turned out to be the nation's largest employee-owned research and development company. It was very entrepreneurial. And I think that was a lot of what gave me a space, right? A sort of an internal marketplace where I could create what became this career. But I think that one of the things you have to be willing to do, and I've had to really coax and control myself at times through places where I felt really stuck. And I see this a lot in, acquaintances and people in my network who are in corporate jobs where they may not feel the latitude to just go create some job that doesn't exist, but they might have their eye on, maybe it's a different department that they want to be in, or maybe they want to change tracks, right? They're on a certain track, they're on an admin track, they're on a management track, but they want to become an HR person or, et cetera. And they feel completely unqualified for that. And that's where I always like to point to someone like you, or at least the position of the president of the United States, and say, I don't care who it is, they're not qualified for it. They ain't never been that before. You ain't going to look at a resume and see, 10 years of being president of the United States. You're not going to see that. So this idea of, and I think even in Buddhism, they talk about beginner's mind, right? This idea of being willing to, again, I love your words on this, Christel. They're the best I've ever heard of, do it wrong, do it badly, do it anyway. It's such a critical component, because if you're not giving yourself permission to do that, you're never going to go for the job. And the person who's going to get the job is the person who is willing to do that. So, what would it create in your world to unleash yourself from this deeply ingrained thing that we've all been socialized for and rewarded for? And, to some extent, Christel, how brilliant were you to just get your GED, right? Because you sort of got out of the system early in a way, because, the rest of us, you've been, unless you're very, very lucky to have some very empowering people in your educational system, you've been rewarded for getting it right. You've been rewarded for being good at it. You've been rewarded for being the best at it, the valedictorian of it. And so it's incredibly uncomfortable, like body catching on fire level, uncomfortable to not be that, right? To be not that.
Well, you've been rewarded according to society's reward system. But what I discovered is that I wasn't rewarded from my point of view. Like, it wasn't rewarding for me personally. And as you were talking, something in there pinged, and I was realizing that all of what shaped my choices was that I looked out in the world. I looked at the menu of choices that were available to me as far as I could see them, and couldn't find anything that was interesting enough for me. But I didn't know how to find something that was interesting to me. So it's interesting to me that you created your jobs, because you were like, well, you didn't try to fit yourself into anything either. You were just like, well, I'm great at this, and I see this, and what about this? And that developed into a position, which is essentially what I did in a totally different way. I was like, well, I love that. Let's go there. Followed just what I loved and what was pulling me forward. And what was next. And I guess so circling back around to the reward thing, I guess that would be something I'd have people watching this look at, is like, if letting go of or fearing the loss of everything that you've created so far is one of the things, just, you got to step back and just look at, are you as a person experiencing the level of reward that you'd like to have? And if not, then what would it take? Is it going to work for you to live without the thing you aren't going for? That's another way I trick myself. It's like, well, you don't have to do it. There's no have tos. You could just sit here and be normal. Is that going to work for you? Are you going to wake up tomorrow morning and look in the mirror and be so happy that you chose that, or something else? And so I trick myself with that all the time. Like, well, is it going to work to just never write a book self? And I'm like, no, I'll do it. Just hang on. I'm getting there. Or whatever it is, right? What conversation can you start to have with yourself to really get yourself to look at, what is life worth living for you? And is this enough? And if it's not, what else can you choose?
Yeah. Wow. Yeah. I'm actually reflecting right now, thinking about my book that is coming into the world. Many folks know this. I'm very grateful for so many of the supporters out there who've been a part of the pre-sale campaign. I've been on this book journey for 7 years, and I've really been having to confront, now that I am with this, publisher, New Degree Press. It's like, and even prior to that, Georgetown University professor Eric Keister, who really has a phenomenal mentoring program for authors. I can't recommend it highly enough. Writing a book is not a full-time endeavor, and that's part of why it's taken 7 years. And the truth is also that I was hiding. And when I got into this program and then accepted by the publisher, it was, how am I going to feel? Am I really going to be satisfied and feel rewarded in my own life if I don't catch this bus? Because this bus is just parked right in front of my life and is offering for me to get on it. And I've gotten on it, and it's also just brought up so much, like, wow, that's actually been a lot of what I've been up to, is terrified of putting so much of me in the world in such a raw, and what feels like a raw and vulnerable way. And again, confronting that energy of judgment. And I would love to hear you talk a little bit, Christel, about this idea of, again, this whole bit about, and doing it anyway, right? And doing it anyway, and doing it anyway. How can we navigate those things?
Well, I think the first thing to get is, you can't navigate them. They're going to come up. They're going to be there. And you're either going to sit terrified on the bathroom floor and die, or you're going to make a choice. I mean, it is that constantly. And for any of you, as you know, that are entrepreneurs or are having an entrepreneurial point of view in your own being, right, about how you're creating your life, you get this, because like, you're either going to sit there and ruminate and think about going to the gym, or you're just going to put your clothes on and walk out the door and go to the gym. And that's just, it's like, so you can use that in every scenario. And you can also see the times in your life where you did spend a year or a month or whatever,
or seven,
not putting on your gym clothes, and finally something will occur, and it will just show. So the bus will show up for the 27th time, and you're like, okay, fine, I'm willing. And you just choose. And so it's just one of those things where, if you're willing, just have a come to Jesus moment with yourself. Sit yourself down, and on whatever surface, doesn't matter, chair, floor, whatever. Sit yourself there and go, okay, self, what are we going to do with this? Are we going to sit here and suffer? Is that what we're going to do? We've been doing that now for let me be vulnerable here for a second. I'm in the process of getting caught up on all of my back taxes in 2 countries for the last 6 years. Talk about writing a book. It's a lot. The reason I tell you that is because it's what most of us hide from ourselves. And but it has been a low growl in my world for the last 6 years. And finally this year we moved to our 3rd country. So now I'm living in Panama, and I'm like, I'm either going to go to jail for tax evasion at some point, or I'm going to sit here and handle what it is that I haven't been willing to handle. And so for the last month, I have been sitting on my laptop doing all kinds of stuff I have no interest in doing, because it's a future that I need to have moving forward. And it will not work functionally if I keep avoiding it.
You're putting your finger on another place where we are sometimes unwilling to do it wrong, do it badly, and do it anyway. And that is sometimes even in these private spaces of ourselves, right? Like a place where we might feel like we don't have skills, we don't have the awareness, we're inadequate for the task, and things like taxes, things like financial management can feel very scary to a lot of people. Yeah. And whether in your own life and or if you're in a role in a business that might require some of that, it can feel very, very scary. And yet, to look it straight in the eye. And, you don't have to become a tax expert. You don't have to become a CPA, right? But you have to be willing to confront and do the parts of that only you can do, right? And you're probably discovering, wow, it's maybe not as bad as I thought. In this world, there is a massive transformation underway with the rise of artificial intelligence, machine learning, quantum computing. I mean, this is already, the seedlings of this are starting to pop through the soil, and this is going to transform the way work is done. Even the pandemic obviously brought, virtual computing and connecting on Zoom and all of this. And someone like yourself has been doing that for quite a while, but I can tell you, there's a lot of people who are deeply uncomfortable about that. There's a lot of people who are very uncomfortable with technology. They're terrified of, and not at all confident that they can learn newfangled things, right? As, and young people coming out of the, into the work world know this like a second language, right? These digital natives. And so, I think there's a real space of, possibility that you're a candle lighter, right? You're showing people, you're shining a floodlight into something that might show up different. For you, it's catching up on these back taxes. For some people, it's learning, and equipping themselves, being willing to be really uncomfortable learning technology so that they can feel that they still have a place in the world of tomorrow professionally.
I guess what I'd really say to people is like, what if you were willing to let the future that is possible lead you forward, and, embrace and surrender to what it takes to have it? Because sometimes what it takes is that stretching and growing, but there's support there for you. It's not something that you have to do on your own, and you can reach out and, ask for what you need. But if you were willing to be owned by the future is possible and allow it to transform you, what would your life be like? And would it be greater? And that's the thing that just continually kind of pulls me forward, is I'll ignore it for a while and then I'll give in.
And then you'll give in. I love that idea of surrendering to that. I just love that. There's such there's a gentleness in that. And there's a choice in that, right? It's not being conquered by it. It's a surrendering. It's a willful choice to surrender into that. And speaking of support, Christel, as we round the bend here, I want to, ask you always have so much going on that is, always contributive to so many people. And certainly we'll be making sure folks know where and how to find you on social media. I think your website is christelcrawford.com. Is that right, Christel? One of your websites is
ChristelJoyCrawford.com. Yeah. You can find it with Christel Crawford. Yeah.
And I told you all she's the joy of business, right? It's her middle name. But Christel, what are there some programs going on that might be of interest to folks that you'd like to share here?
Absolutely. I think the primary thing I want to share with you guys is something called Infinite Being School, which is actually free. If you go to infinitebeingschool.com, you get instant access to 2 digital courses. One is called Back to Basics, which really is me gifting you like 10 little shorty videos of access consciousness tools that really have changed things for me dynamically, and a little 30-day challenge that you can just engage in the privacy of your own home with your coffee. And so that's where I would send you, is infinitebeingschool.com. That really, through that school, is going to start to become the hub of all activities. So you can receive all the announcements of new classes I have coming, and I do a daily live stream in that Telegram group that you can tap into. And so it's just a really instant, easy access to change, if that's something you're interested in.
Well, like I said, Christel, you are just such a you're a catalyst for change. You're a beacon for change. You're such an empowering presence and space of total non-judgment for anyone in their lives looking to change anything, whether it's your job, your career, even where you live, anything at all, or maybe you don't even know exactly what you want to change, but you're just feeling, as Christel said earlier, sort of finding yourself looking out the window saying, is this it? Is this it? I'm just feeling sort of blah in my life. I invite you to look Christel up. She's a phenomenal coach, facilitator, creator of magnitude. I am grateful, Christel, for your presence in my own life through so many of your offerings and your social media stuff. And I thank you for being willing to share some of your time with everyone who will be watching this in the future or listening to this in the future. Any final parting questions or thoughts that you'd like to offer, Christel, before we sign off?
Well, I'm just so grateful. Thank you so much. And, for all of you watching, it's like, you can trust you. You always know. And if you need support or you want to support yourself in that, find the thing that's going, like, reach for it. Reach for the thing that's going to actually gift you.